the concept remains the same. Skill is a baseline. Hope everybody's doing well. This is Josiah Igono of the All Things Performance Podcast. And today I wanted to answer a very specific question by somebody in the audience, right? And this listener says this, and I'm going to read the exact question because at first I was just like, where's he going with this? But then I said, got it, right? So the question is, do you have a video on competitive will versus skill? So here you have this will versus skill mindset, right? Talent versus work ethic. We see this a lot in high levels of sports. Who's going to make it to the end? The kid who has the most talent or the kid who has the most heart? This is one of the reasons why we love movies like Rocky Balboa, the whole Rocky Balboa series. We love watching that stuff. We love watching movies like Rudy, right? The whole underdog story is appealing for many reasons because we see ourselves in those stories a lot of times. And the whole will versus skill argument or conversation is one that I believe is very important. I think it's very important. And what I want to do is I want to add some meat on the bone in terms of the literature and just, the reality of the situation, right? So, one of the things that I believe is that when you start talking about high level athletics, let's talk about pros, right? If you're talking about being a professional athlete, or even if you're talking about playing at one of the most esteemed universities in the country, or a top high school in the country, or a top club program, travel ball program in the country, the concept remains the same. Skill is a baseline. I'm going to say that again. Skill is a baseline. Everybody in that performance environment has to have skill, or you're not going to survive. You have to have skill. It's like the field goal kicker in the NFL. Most field goal kickers, if you line them up and you want them to hit 40-yard field goals on air, no one there or whatever, they should be able to hit 9 out of 10 of those field goals. You know what I'm saying? 30 yards in, they should be able to hit 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 field goals. 20 yards in, 10 out of 10, right? We call them chip shots. These are things that they've done so many times that they almost cannot get it wrong. But then all of a sudden, when you start adding elements like a defense or pressure or a time constraint, you start adding things like the elements or, whatever the case may be. Now all of a sudden that skill gets threatened. So when we start this conversation off, and you start talking about will versus skill, the number one thing that we have to keep in mind is that skill is a baseline. It's a baseline. If you want to look at the normative data of every major league pitcher, of every NFL lineman, you will start to see that a lot of people are very similar. It's very similar. I would argue that the NFL probably has it figured out the best in terms of the data that they use to project how certain players are going to play. And the only reason I say that is because, there is no farm system in the NFL. The farm system literally is college. So in order for an NFL organization to invest all this money into a player, there's a lot of research that goes into that. A lot of it includes obviously game film. It includes combine measurables. It includes a lot of data that they take before they make their picks. So this is not a podcast for that in terms of talent identification. But what I will say is this, is that anytime you are talking about a high performance environment and you're having this will versus skill conversation, skill is a baseline. Everybody has to have it. You better, be average and or above when you're in a high performing environment. Okay. So let's talk about the psychology now, right? Let's talk about the science. So when you start looking at who's going to perform better, the guy who has the talent or the guy who has the skill, we've already established that skill is a baseline. Research shows us that the number one separator when you have two similar athletes are psychological variables. That's the number one separator when you have two athletes. If you have athlete A and athlete B and they are both a carbon copy of each other in terms of their talent, the number one separator are psychological variables. How does this athlete navigate things like confidence, mental toughness, imposter syndrome? How does he or she deal with something like perfectionism? Right? The athlete who knows and can navigate and has plans in place for all of those things as they go through their athletic experience, that athlete will outperform and outclass his or her peers. Period. So now let's ask that question again. Will versus skill. Skill gets you in the door. Skill gets you in the room. Skill will get you drafted. Skill will get you a contract. But in the most crucial of situations, the most crucial of platforms, who's going to deliver? Is it the skilled athlete or is it the one who has that will? Right? And I think it's very important, while we're talking about this, you have to define what will is, right? Because when you start talking about things like mental toughness, is that will? Is resilience will? Is confidence will? There's just, it's grit. There's so many words, right? So many adjectives. But I think that when you look at it at its most basic level, how I would answer that question is that skill is a baseline, and the will, the heart of a man, the heart of a woman, the heart of a competitor, that's almost immeasurable, right? It's like this, right? This is the age-old question that I have seen asked, I have asked myself, and that I have seen played out in the world of sports. Why is it that the first round draft pick gets into a pressure-packed situation and this athlete will just choke in a critical situation? And then conversely, this athlete from nowhere, America, doesn't even get drafted, free agent, walk on, whatever the case may be, the adjective may be, comes into the situation and absolutely dominates. Like absolutely dominates. Will versus skill. I bet you in every one of those situations when you have this no-name person who comes and dominates, I guarantee you that individual had the requisite skill to get them into the door, and in their will, their work ethic, their take on mental toughness, resilience, confidence, being a healthy perfectionist, I guarantee you all of that took over once they got into that room. And so, when I started looking at this question, that's how I would answer it. There's a book that came out a long time ago by John Maxwell. John Maxwell is one of the foremost leaders in leadership. No pun intended, pun intended. He is one of the foremost leaders in leadership. Okay. And he has a book called Talent is Never Enough. I think it's called Talent is Never Enough or Why Talent is Never Enough. It's something like that. Right. And talent, I've heard many leaders say this term, that your gift, right? The thing that God gave you, it'll get you into the room, but character and discipline is what's going to keep you in the room. Character is what's going to sustain you. Discipline is what's going to keep you. And so I believe that you need both of these things. You have to have both of these things. But they are very important at different stages in your development and in your journey, right? I have seen so many athletes. One of the things that I would do when I was working in professional baseball is they would send me out during draft. And I would go and I would visit with players and their families to determine whether or not we would draft a kid or to get more information before we drafted said kid. And I went everywhere. I mean, I was, on the East Coast. I went to Canada. I was in California on the West Coast. I went up to the Great Northwest. I'm not going to say any of the names, but a lot of these names you're seeing on television now, right? And they would ask me, or they would send me to go and interview these families, and I would come back with my report about the player and what I heard and what I discerned. And, there was different measurables and things like that as well. And one of the things that I have seen, so I was on that side of it too, right? And then I also was a strength coach as well. So I would see guys in the weight room. And one of the things that I absolutely love, and this is not in a sadistic or a crazy way, is I absolutely love seeing people at their breaking point. When it's really hot, when it's 115 degrees, do you really want to go get this work outside in the heat? Right? When you're really tired, when, you don't want to be there, do you really want to get this work? And I would see athletes at their breaking point. And the reason why I love this is because it gave me a first row seat at the mentality and the makeup of an individual. When somebody's at their breaking point, you get a chance to see who they really are. And as a strength coach, one of the reasons why I love being a strength conditioning coach is because I would see that on a daily basis, on a regular basis. And like, if you ever want to know the heart of a man, if you're in an organization, you want to get information on a player, go ask the strength coaches. Go ask them, because they know and they see these guys and gals before their breaking point. They are at their breaking point. They know who's who, right? And so one of the things that I would see on a normal basis, right? I shared with you the psychological road for a lot of these athletes, and then now before that I was on the physical side, so I would see these guys physiologically what they would do, right? And so when you take those two worlds into consideration, the psychological and the physical, you get a chance to really see who's who. And when it comes to this whole will versus skill thing, the reason I'm telling you these two different backgrounds is because I literally have seen the first round draft pick, the high draft pick, who didn't have the will, man. Did not have the will. You know what I'm saying? We always he didn't have that dog in him, right? He didn't know how to build confidence. He didn't know that he was that he had purpose before he even put the cleats on, and that he will have purpose long after he retires from the game. I've seen that top tier, fast-tracked, golden child athlete. I've seen it multiple times. And then I've also seen the kid who wasn't even drafted in his appropriate position. The kid who turned the lemons into lemonade. The kid who defied all odds, wasn't supposed to make it, was being dog cussed and maligned in meetings by the experts. And all of a sudden, this person, because of that thing that we call will, because of this nonstop devotion to work ethic, because of that doggedness, right? This relentlessness that says, I'm not going to let go. This person became one of the best to ever do it from his hometown, became one of the best to ever do it in his organization, and became one of the best to ever do it in his or her respective leagues. I've seen that too. So when you start talking about will versus skill, they are both important. And if we start talking about high performing athletics, like where everybody's good, skill is the baseline. And the will is what's going to sustain you. Again, this is high performing athletics. I will say this, at the end of the day, all of your favorite athletes, fill in the blank, have devoted tens of thousands or more of hours to their trade craft. Tens of thousands of hours. They don't just wake up and all of a sudden they're good. No, 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 no. You can have all the will you want. But if you're a donkey, right, that donkey has no shot in the Kentucky Derby. No shot. You can have all the will you want. Oh, I think I can. I think I can. That donkey ain't got no shot. He has no shot at competing and playing or racing rather in the Kentucky Derby. No shot. And y'all are smart enough and intelligent enough to know why, right? So when it comes to the normative data of your respective sport, you all have to be able to do something that everyone else can do, or you have to be better than everyone else in order for you to have any type of sustainable average career. But if you talk, when we start talking about will, like everybody and their mom is good enough to be there, that's where will comes into place. And that's where this whole the whole science comes into place, right? When you have two athletes of like ability, of like talent, of similar talent, the number one separator are psychological variables. Period. Full stop. I hope that answers the question. If you are ever interested in developing your mental skills, I don't have a book in front of me right now, but I do have a book that I've written. It's called Own the Pieces. And it is, I think it's, if I can brag, I think it's an amazing book, right? The book is basically like you and I having coffee. We're having coffee and we're talking about mental performance. It's written to you, and it's written in a way that is very easy to understand. And so I talk about the philosophy of different things like confidence, things like perfectionism, playing in the zone. And then there's, on the second half of that book, there are skills, there are mental skills, there are 12 mental skills that I teach you how to do that you can start doing right now. And so if you are interested in that book is available online where books are sold. It's called Own the Pieces, right? The Heartfelt Guide to Mental Performance. And so that book goes into more detail in terms of being that athlete, potentially being that athlete that when you have somebody that looks like you, plays defense like you can separate from that person because this is stronger than your competitor. This is Josiah Igono with the All Things Performance Podcast. God bless you, and we'll talk to you soon.